Mic check 1 2. Hello, hello. Welcome. This is Just Human, episode 364. I'm recording this like a day later after recording episode 363 because I'm feeling better. If you haven't watched episode 363, then or listened to it, then you may not get exactly where I'm coming from with this. But as I said in the description of the show and in like the title, that I had a problem and I really need to sort it out, and sometimes with things that are bothering me that are on my mind, what I need to do is I need to go for a walk, or I need to journal, or I need to uh do some meditation or something. But it just felt like what I needed to do with what was bothering me yesterday, day before, is I need to go to the microphone with it. And one, because I feel like I needed to talk it out. I needed to go through the material and describe it. And I just I felt compelled to do that. And then the other thing that drove me to do it, besides the sense that that was going to be a good way to arrive at a resolution, the other thing that drove me to go about it that way, to bring it to the microphone, was that I felt like there was a decent chance that I'm not alone and that a lot of people are feeling something similar or have felt something similar. And the surprise with all of it, as comes about at the end of the episode, is that the very thing I'm kind of complaining about and seeing people in the Trump administration engage in and make mistakes with, playing this game, this finite game of trying to beat each black pillar and each doomer, and to constantly try and counter the media who's hostile to you, that's a finite game because you're going for this finite win of head-to-head matchup between you and this one opponent who's already hostile to you and is most likely not engaging in good faith anyway. So it's an unwinnable game because from their perspective, it's an infinite game. Their game is not to convince you that they're right. Their game is just to make you look bad in whichever way they can and to stick to their narrative that they've already decided on. So as long as they don't change their narrative and as long as they keep on being hostile to you, they're going to end up winning their infinite game that they're playing. Because if you do succeed, let's say, on this one point of defeating them on this one piece of news or event or something Trump said or something the administration did, if you win and defeat them with facts and evidence, with documentation, whatever, they'll just move on to the next thing to attack you with. It won't change anything about the way they operate. And they'll have wasted your resources. They'll have, it's just like wrestling with a pig. It's exactly that, wrestling with a pig type thing. So the surprise in that podcast was me going through all that, and then at the end of it realizing I was doing the same thing. And I was doing the same thing through projecting onto the administration my own shadow. And that's what I was talking about when I said that I'm having like this Jungian realization, this Jungian moment where I'm realizing how my own shadow, I said I was projecting it. I am projecting it, but I'm seeing my shadow in others. And Carl Jung is one of my favorite people to read his works, to listen to him. There's not a whole lot of recordings of him out there, but there's some. And I just really like his material. It really resonates with me. There are other philosophers and psychologists whose work I like a lot. And that was just one of those moments of clarity that you arrive at through a process of spelling out what is on your mind and then turning it on yourself and going through some introspection, and immediately afterward, just immediately, well, in the very, very immediate time period after I recorded that, I felt like this big release. I just felt like I was like this weight lifted off to me, and I was much more sober in my thinking. And then pretty soon after, and definitely the next day, today, well, Wednesday, the episode came out Wednesday morning. So yesterday, and then going into today, Thursday, I've just felt so much more positive and so much more free of that game and free from that shadow. And so it's been like this really good experience for me. And I felt like, okay, I feel kind of invigorated, or I want to get back in front of the microphone and keep talking. So which is great. Which is great. So anyway, I decided to start throwing this episode together. Hopefully it's going to come out on Friday morning for podcast subscribers. And I only have a couple topics planned right now, and then I'll see what I can add on to it. No idea how long this is going to be, but I felt like it would be a good thing to immediately come to you guys again and thank you for being in the audience and listening to me. And um it's just another one of those times where going to speaking this stuff out, going through the material on my own, and then bringing it to a microphone, making a video, making a podcast about it is it's such a positive experience for me. And I end up learning more and about myself, and then about the news and events. And uh there's just so many, and I get positive feedback from you guys. It's just so, man, it's just so good. And I hope that it's good. Like, I hope you guys got something out of it as well, and it was a positive thing for you guys. Some people have gotten back to me and said that it was, and they really related to it. Some of the things I said in the episode, people got upset with. Not really surprised by that. Um, it goes like that sometimes. But yeah, yeah. So anyway, um, if you haven't listened to episode 363, then none of this probably makes sense to you. If you want to, you can just listen to this clip that I made, that I titled "Trump Admin Keeps Playing an Unwinnable Game," and they do. And we are going to still talk about that in this episode because there's a new story that is very appropriate for that. So there is going to be just a little bit of a retread of material from episode 363 in this episode, but then that's not the whole point of it. There's a couple news stories I want to get to. So Linktree is in the usual spot in the description. It's in my profile. You can find places to follow, watch, listen, and support. Thank you everybody who supports the show through your purchases at my affiliates, Benson Honey Farms, Bootleg Products, Manly Cans. Thank you to everybody who goes to ko-fi.com and buys me a cup of coffee. Really appreciate it. In fact, I made kind of a 3/4 pot of coffee this morning. Ran around, did some errands. I'm now on that last cup of it, and I'm probably going to have to pause the recording and go make some more coffee. You can subscribe to me on Threadreader, Substack, justhuman.substack.com, YouTube, and on Rumble. On YouTube and Rumble, I have playlists. And one of the new playlists I've started is United States v. Asif Merchant, which is the case of the Iranian agent who came to the U.S. to arrange a murder for hire plot that targeted Trump officials, believed to be including Trump himself, probably Bolton, Mike Pompeo, and others who were involved with the hit on Soleimani and other things. That video series, that trial it's going to go to trial in November, or no, sorry. It's going to trial in February, next month, February 23rd, unless there's a schedule change, which there could be. But I've decided to do a video series that'll catch you up on everything going on in that case leading up to the trial. And I'm doing it, one, because I think it's a fascinating case. Two, because it involves Trump and an assassination plot. So it's one of 3 assassination plots from 2024 that we know of. The other reason I'm doing it is because I just find it, I want to go through this exercise of presenting a case in an episodic format, because I like getting into the details with things and being, just pouring through page by page. I like doing that, but I also know that not everybody has the time to listen to that. So I'm trying to get better at drilling down to the most important information and still going through it page by page, but not taking so long. um anyway, so that playlist for that and playlist for other things are over on Rumble and YouTube. And I'm going to be making a new playlist for the first topic I'm going to get to today, which is going to be about the leaker, the defense contractor, and the Washington Post reporter, because we have some new information on that. So let me get these opened up. All right, so about a week ago, the FBI arrested a man named Aurelio Luis Perez-Lugones, who is a defense contractor in the Washington, D.C. area. And they accused him of stealing classified information, specifically Defense Department information, I believe, or intelligence agency information. We don't exactly know what files he got, but it seems like he got reports, intelligence reports on Venezuela, and that he was acquiring them over several weeks. He was printing them out. He was looking at them in the skiff. And then taking notes on a notepad, and then taking those pieces of paper that he wrote on those notes, taking them home. And he was arrested, and his home was searched. His vehicle was searched. At his home, they found some classified information, some documents. They found the same yellow pad notes he had taken, and it had classified information on there that he had copied from inside the skiff. They found some of the notes inside a lunchbox in his vehicle, I believe. And at the same time, or immediately after arresting and conducting a search at his home, FBI also raided the home of Washington Post reporter Hannah Natanson. Now, anytime a journalist is brought under scrutiny in this way, or is certainly when they're subject to a search warrant, the media goes crazy, because journalists are one of the protected classes in this country. And certainly they do have some First Amendment rights, just like we all do, but they don't have the right to pilfer, solicit, transmit classified information. And since that arrest happened, and that we know for a fact the search of the Washington Post reporter was related to the search of Perez-Lugones' home and his arrest, we know that because there's been statements that he was we know they're related because it is Washington Post reporter Natanson whom it is alleged this defense contractor was sending classified information to. And there's a revelation that has come about that gives us a bit of insight into how the FBI knows that. And that piece of information is that at the time of his arrest, Perez-Lugones was actively communicating with Washington Post reporter Hannah Natanson on his mobile device. And in the chat, there was classified information. Boom. So now, since this has happened, since this arrest has happened, and since this search has happened, some other legal action has come about. By the way, Perez-Lugones is currently in jail. He's being held. And I don't actually know when the date of his next hearing is scheduled. I do not see a date. I don't know when his next... No, I don't know. I don't see it. It doesn't immediately pop out to me when his next hearing is. Okay. Anyway, he's in jail right now. The two legal actions that come about. One is a motion or a case seeking to unseal the search warrant for Hannah Natanson. Now, all the media are involved in it, and this is what we see anytime the media, one of the members, comes under scrutiny in this way, and certainly when they're subject to a search warrant. All of the media are going to join together to try and protect this reporter because they don't want the same thing to happen to them. Now, I'm not alleging that what they're doing is wrong or anything. I'm just saying that you see this kind of response. And so they're seeking to unseal the search warrant. I wouldn't mind if it was unsealed. It would be very interesting to read. Here is their 12-page motion for why it should be unsealed. And hey, I'm not really opposed to that. The other legal action is from Hannah Natanson and the Washington Post itself, which sought a stay, a freezing of the FBI processing the materials they seized. They ask a judge to please tell the FBI and DOJ to stop looking at the devices that were seized from our reporter. We think that there's First Amendment violations here. We think there's Fourth Amendment violations here. We think there's attorney-client privilege violations. Freeze. We want a legal process to play out. And here's their memo in support of that. And they talk about how on the devices that were seized, there was attorney-client privilege information. There were draft reports. There was all sorts of notes and communications with other people that are protected communications. There's information about her sources. And so this whole thing needs to needs to be frozen in place until things can be sorted out, which they could be sorted by a filter team, a special master, some sort of third party who's going to make sure that the government only gets access to the information that they actually need for whatever legal action they're taking, the criminal prosecution of Perez-Lugones or whatever else. Hey, this is post-editing human here again. And I just wanted to say everything I just rattled off, I was completely correct about, but I didn't show the receipts for it. So I was kind of rushing through it. And I kind of regret it now because I wasn't as thorough as I usually am. But I wanted to show that, yeah, according to their own motion it's from the Washington Post and from reporter Hannah Natanson. And what they want is for the return of her property, because they argue that the government's search warrant that seized these devices isn't specific enough, and it's had the effect of suppressing, or I shouldn't use the word suppressing, preventing her from engaging in her job. And since some of the devices are owned by the Washington Post, it's also interfered in their ability to conduct their operations. And so, and also because of sensitive items on it, such as information about the 1,100 sources within the federal government who have helped the Post break recent news stories over the past year, and because of attorney-client privilege material that's on it, and First Amendment protected material that's on it, they filed for this Rule 41G, return of property, which we've seen in Richmond, and then the oh, hey Athena. Athena wants to have her say about this too. I don't know if y'all heard her or not. She let out a big one. And because of the potential for there to be violations of people's attorney-client privilege and other things, and whistleblower rights or whatever, they're seeking the return of the non-responsive data and judicial oversight of the other stuff. So in other cases involving seizure, this is from their motion. In other cases involving the seizure of constitutionally protected or privileged information, courts require judicial oversight. And it could be a special master is appointed, or it could be a filter team. So they raise those things specifically, and then they give some examples through this motion. So anyway, I wanted to bring that up and just kind of reinforce that I just rattled off a bunch of things in the podcast without showing the receipts like I usually do. Here's one of the receipts for a bunch of what I just said. And I also wanted to clarify, because I don't really make this clear in this segment, that this is not, I know it's going to be reported this way by media on the right, that this is some judge interfering on behalf of deep state Washington Post and they're blocking and it's obstruction or whatever. And I totally understand why people would think that. And on the left, in the legacy media, they're going to be saying, see, this judge is putting Kash Patel's overzealous FBI in its place. Both of those are kind of sensational positions to take, and they're typical of our politics these days. What's really going on is that you, me, anybody who's been subject of a search warrant, we can do this. If the FBI sees something from you right now, and it had material on it that you believed was protected or was attorney-client privilege or in some way had nothing to do with the search warrant that the device was seized pursuant to, you could do this same thing. You could go to a judge and make this same argument, and maybe you could convince him to put in this sort of a standstill order, a freeze order, and it requires the government to then come in, or the DOJ to come in, make their case to the judge, and the judge decide what he's going to do, whether he's going to look at it. If it was a small amount of material, the judge might look at it himself, I guess. I don't really know. But there could be a filter team used for the privilege stuff or a special master appointed. And it's all about just ensuring that people's rights are protected. And yes, it slows down law enforcement. And that's a downside of it, but it protects our rights. And that is always essential in all things. All right, so back to the segment. And the judge agreed, and the judge blocked, he put in an order to block the FBI from accessing and searching through the information that is on these seized devices. Now, it's only temporary. There's going to be hearings about this. There's going to be filings about this, and it's going to be a pretty interesting case because it has to do with the First Amendment and protections on sources and whistleblowers. And we know that Hannah Natanson had said over 1,000 people had contacted her in the past like 6 months or so, wanting to tell her stuff about the Trump admin. So this could get pretty sensational. And there's a potential here for a lot of rumors and a lot of complaints about the Trump administration for people who were fired or laid off or left, for what they said to her to get amplified to a much greater extent than it otherwise would have been. But there's also the potential here to learn that this Washington Post reporter was not only receiving classified information, she might have been soliciting it, which would be a crime. I'm not saying that's what she was doing. I'm saying that that's a potential. This guy, Perez-Lugones, was in communication with her at the very moment he was arrested. And he was accessing this classified information for a reason. We'll learn more about it later. I shouldn't speculate too much. One thing we've learned since it happened is we got part of the search warrant, which is this property that was going to be seized. And it lists out exactly what was taken from her. There's a handy recorder, like a little handheld recorder. There's a silver MacBook Pro. There's a 1 terabyte portable drive, another MacBook Pro, a purple Garmin Forerunner, which is like a smartwatch, and then a pink iPhone. So iPhone, smartwatch, 2 MacBook Pros, a portable drive, and a handheld recording device. We've also learned something else about how Perez-Lugones got caught, which we already suspected it had a lot to do with the fact he was printing these things off, and print jobs are monitored. But one of the things is that they were able to go to an office printer and just look at the exact images of what it was he printed off, which is similar to what we've seen in other leaker cases over the past few years, where someone decides to, I don't know why they're so dumb that they don't realize that all printers, they don't just save a little log of the print jobs they do and when they do it. They put little dot IDs. It's like not like a QR code, but it's a dot code on everything they print that are very, very small, that traces that document back to that printer. It's stored in the memory of the printer exactly what it was you printed, not just when and from what computer, but the actual thing you printed is stored in the printer. So it was not, I don't think it was very difficult for investigators to determine who was printing and these things and what exactly they were printing. So quite an embarrassing thing. But it's good though. It's good that people who compromise national security are so dumb sometimes, right? And something else about the case I want to highlight, and it's probably gonna trigger some people. the veteran national security prosecutor who obtained the warrants for Natanson devices is Gordon Kromberg, who previously oversaw the criminal case against WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange and several investigations into fundraising and other support for terrorism groups in Northern Virginia. So, good on you, Kromberg. I'm sorry that the last DOJ gave Julian Assange a plea deal that never should have happened. They should have brought him to the US to stand trial. One of the great disappointments I have had with DOJ over the past couple of years is that Julian Assange did not get put on trial. So, all right, dogs are bugging me to go outside. I gotta move. I gotta go. All right, so Lindsey Halligan is out at the U.S. Attorney's Office in Eastern District of Virginia. She had already been found to have been unlawfully appointed and disqualified by a judge back in November, which resulted in all of the cases that she had been the signer of indictments for to be dismissed because she never had the power lawfully to indict anyone or to authorize search warrants or to do anything on behalf of the executive branch of the United States of America. At one point, I think it was on October 30th or October 31st, Pam Bondi did come in and sign an order granting Lindsey Halligan the authority to be a special attorney for DOJ and to do specific things. And Pam Bondi ratified the indictments against the high-profile cases that Halligan was the lead on, which were, of course, were James Comey case and the Letitia James case. But the original indictments were still invalid. And I've spent many episodes, many videos going over the James Comey case. It's definitely up there with one of my favorite things I've ever done, but I've said since the very, very beginning that it was a flawed case on the facts, that it was flawed in the way it came about, and that I didn't think it was actually going to be about getting James Comey. I thought it was about getting at documents, specifically the Arctic Haze documents. And I still think I'm right about that, but I'm either right about it because that was the intention all along, and this has been some sort of 5D chess kind of thing going on, that's originally where I was at on it, because it didn't make sense any other way. But as we learned more about the Comey case and we realized so many mistakes were made with it, including violations of Daniel Richman's rights and violations of Comey's attorney-client privilege, and we learned about all these missteps that happened in the grand jury process and the rush to indict, and then the filter team being brought in post facto, or at least late. So many things that just were incorrect about how that indictment came about and how that case went. It just showed so many fractures in it, and it just looked bad and then kept on looking worse and worse and worse. And it's under appeal. And the DOJ has appealed the original ruling that disqualified Halligan, because what they want to argue essentially is that the president has the authority, according to the Constitution, to appoint whoever it is he wants to be a U.S. attorney, to be a prosecutor at these attorneys' offices. Nobody really debates that. But the way the statute reads is that he gets to make an interim appointment that lasts 120 days. And then after that is up, if the Senate has not confirmed his official nominee for that seat, there can be an interim appointment and then a nominee. They don't have to be the same people. They can be two different people. But if the Senate hasn't confirmed them, then the district court judges will vote on who they want to be the acting U.S. attorney in that office until there is a Senate confirmed appointee. And through the process of going through the Comey case and the arguments about that specific issue, myself and my audience, gained an education about some of these things. And I think we all kind of went back and forth on whether or not the way the process I just described is the only lawful process, or if there's this alternative way where the president could do back-to-back interim appointments for 120 days. Once the 120 days are up, he'll just do a different person for 120 days. That was the argument that DOJ was using. And they've said the president has the authority to, if he has the authority to do one person for 120 days, he has the authority to do multiple people for 120 days. Judges across the country, from New York to Virginia to New Jersey to Utah, or was it Nevada? Nevada and California have disagreed with that and have thrown out every attorney that Trump has appointed as part of a back-to-back interim appointment. They've all been found on appeal over and over again in the district, and then also on appeal in the Court of Appeals, that they're not lawfully appointed. And so I don't expect the Trump admin to win on the Comey case and Letitia James case, just like they haven't won anywhere else on this argument. But it's kind of become moot now, and I don't know what's going to happen with this appeal to the Fourth Circuit over Lindsey Halligan being disqualified. Now that Attorney General Pam Bondi has said, okay, Lindsey Halligan's done. We give up on it. And she wrote this praising Lindsey Halligan and talking about how great she was, and that unnecessary legal obstacles were placed in her path, and all these things. And, I just feel like it's lipstick on a pig, to be honest with you guys. I feel like it's lipstick on a pig. I also feel like it's Pam Bondi being in an extremely bad situation that she didn't ask for, and she's trying to handle it as best she can. I don't criticize Pam Bondi for how this thing happened with Halligan. A lot of people are going to blame Pam Bondi for the Comey case, Letitia James case falling apart, not realizing it was never successfully put together in the first place. And I think that a lot of people are going to blame Pam Bondi for how things have gone with Lindsey Halligan, when it's not Pam Bondi's fault. It is, well, before I get to whose fault it is, I need to back up just a bit and remind you of what was going on before she was appointed. What was going on beforehand was that Eric Siebert, who was Trump's original 120-day interim appointment for the EDVA, Eric Siebert was the guy Trump selected to be there. And after the 120 days had gone by, and he hadn't been confirmed in the U.S. Senate, the district court judges went through the normal process that has been happening for decades, which was they decided to retain the president's pick for interim appointment. And that's typically what happens. It's not that the district judges come in and they just pick whoever they want. They tend to, I don't remember what the stat was, but almost every single time they elect to keep the president's pick for that office. Whoever was the interim pick, the district judges decide to keep that person on, or they select the first U.S. attorney, the first assistant, so the second in command in the office, to take the job, because that typically is someone who has experience in that office. And so the whole point of it is so that there's stability in the prosecutor's office and they can keep on conducting the work that they do. And Eric Siebert was kept on by the district judges. And again, that was Trump's guy. That was Trump's first pick. They didn't go against Trump. It was still his guy there. However, apparently, Trump got very frustrated with Eric Siebert because Trump communicated to that office through Pam Bondi. I don't know exactly how it went about, but it was communicated to that office that Trump wanted James Comey looked at and he wanted Letitia James looked at. And that office of the EDVA did look at them, they went through all the files on it, the report from, what was it, HUD or whoever on Letitia James, and Bill Pulte, I think it was the guy who had found some documents that were questionable and that she may have put some false information on some financial documents. And on Comey, they went through the old case of him lying to Congress, false statements to Congress, and they called in former special counsel John Durham to come in. They called in other investigators from the Arctic Haze investigation, the media leak investigation. They went through and they said, there's no case here. We're not going to bring criminal charging against James Comey or Letitia James. There's no case there. And Trump didn't like that. And Trump fired Eric Siebert. Of course, Eric Siebert says he resigned. Some other people in the office also left. And then at that moment, okay, at this moment between Eric Siebert being out and before Lindsey Halligan came in, there was another choice. And that person was, is it Mary Cleary, I believe? I believe it's Mary Cleary. For some reason, her first name got cut off right there. Hold on just a moment. Yeah, when I had it in reader view, it had cut off the intro paragraphs to this. So in that gap, Attorney General Pam Bondi stepped up and did her job and tapped a new top federal prosecutor in the EDVA to take the place of Eric Siebert after he resigned. And that person was, and she was appointed by Bondi, Mary Maggie Cleary. And Mary Maggie Cleary is a Republican, and she's someone with a bit of a story, which you would think Trump and MAGA would be fond of and would really back Cleary to be in that role. And it's that Mary Maggie Cleary was framed as having been at the Capitol on January 6th. Somebody put in anonymous reports to the Roanoke Times alleging they had a photo of Mary Cleary on the Capitol grounds on January 6th, holding a fractured piece of the Speaker Pelosi sign. But it was false. She wasn't there. And she went through this process of trying to prove that she didn't participate in the riot. And she decided that she wanted to go work for DOJ after having been falsely accused. And she specifically said it was a weaponized investigation, and she wanted to end those types of things. And now I don't know, I remember her from that she was still there after Halligan was there. But what I want to point out, the point I want to make is that after Siebert's gone, Bondi immediately appointed someone, and she was the first assistant U.S. attorney to take over. All right, to fill the gap. But then Trump stepped in, and Trump made this infamous Truth Social post saying that he had reviewed 30 statements and posts saying the same old thing. Same old story as last time. All talk, no action. Nothing's being done. What about Comey, Adam Shifty Schiff, Letitia? They're all guilty as hell, but nothing is going to be done. And then we almost put in a Democrat-supported U.S. attorney in Virginia with a really bad Republican past. I don't know who exactly he's referring to. A woke rhino who was never going to do his job. I think he's talking about Eric Siebert, but Eric Siebert was his pick. That's why two of the worst Dem senators pushed him so hard. He even lied to the media and said he quit. He must be talking about Siebert. And that he said we had no case. No, I fired him. And there is a great case. Many lawyers agree. Lindsey Halligan is a good lawyer and likes you a lot, Pam. That's who he's talking to. We can't delay any longer. It's killing our reputation and credibility. They impeached me twice and indicted me 5 times over nothing. Justice must be served now. President DJT, September 20th, 2025 at 6:44 p.m. And then later on that same night, a couple hours later, he posted, "It's my great honor to appoint Lindsey Halligan." So the reason we're here with Pam Bondi having to put lipstick on a pig, the situation is the pig, not Halligan's the pig. And by the way, I feel bad for Halligan. I genuinely feel bad for Halligan because she was put in an impossible situation. But the whole reason we went through this entire ordeal is because Trump chose Halligan, and Trump pushed aside, in so doing, he pushed aside Maggie Cleary, who Bondi had already put in that office, according to internal memo that was circulated immediately after Siebert was out. The whole reason there is because Trump told Bondi to put Halligan there. And what was Trump's reason, guys? Trump's reason was not because Lindsey Halligan is so good at being a prosecutor, she had 0 experience. Trump's reason was not because there's this there's not a meritorious argument. There's not a it wasn't merit based. It wasn't because of anything to do with that. It wasn't because they went through a process to decide on who it needed to be. Trump put her there because of the narrative. And I know I'm going back to what I said in my previous podcast episode and in a previous video, but I want to make this point because I think it's very important. The whole reason Halligan ended up in that office, the whole reason the James Comey case came about and crashed and burned, the whole reason the Letitia James case came about and crashed and burned is because of Trump engaging in a narrative combat with black pillars and people who hate him anyway, people who are doomers and are never going to be satisfied. And he forced a person into a U.S. attorney's office and tasked them with doing a job that shouldn't have been done. The cases never should have been brought. And Halligan never should have been in that office. It's wrong. It's wrong for someone to be indicted because the president wants a story that makes them look good or that is supposed to hush the panicans. And it's gotten us into a very bad place. Now, I still think it's possible that part of the objective here was to unseal the Arctic case search warrant and some things like that. So I'm not completely throwing out the theory I've had all along. But I'm also not going to ignore what took place and how much damage it's done to both Trump's reputation, to that office, to DOJ. I mean, are the black pillars happy now? They're more black pilly than ever, right? So, and it's just wrong. It's unethical. It is not just to indict someone on when there is no case, but to do it anyway because the president wants it done. And that's what appears to have happened here. They violated Richmond's Fourth Amendment rights in order to do this. And they violated attorney-client privilege in order to get that indictment. And we know that now. There's no debate over that. It's in the court filings. And I went through that on my coverage of the show. And I wanted of the case. And I wanted to go over a post I made where I clipped out something from my most recent podcast and in episode 363. And I made this post because I kind of explained it a little bit better, what I'm getting at here. And well, I'll just read it out. An observation that I made in my recent podcast: the Trump administration, which has racked up so many victories over the past year and enjoyed an epic run of successes across numerous areas, keeps engaging in an unwinnable game, which is trying to beat hostile media, such as the legacy outlets, the mainstream networks, the influencers, and the grifters, at the narrative warfare level. It's an infinite game played against it's a finite game played against an infinite player. They're playing a finite game. So the latter will always win, but it's a game that is always present. It's always confronting them, meaning the Trump admin. It's always luring them in and challenging them and tempting them into exchanges that benefit the media side, but rarely benefit the administration. And since posting this, I've seen a dozen examples of them doing this, such as today, the White House was posting photos of people that just got arrested. But guys, they've edited the photos with AI to change the facial expressions of the defendants. It's going to bite them in the ass. That defendant is going to sue this administration for defamation, for all sorts of things. It's not right. It's not professional. It's not right. The way that some of these social media accounts that represent this administration are engaging with the public and are portraying yet to be convicted defendants. they're not going about it with the dignity and respect that these offices hold. And it's not just that it makes them look bad, it's that these defendants are actually going to be able to defeat their cases and possibly get a lot of money because of these silly missteps. And where are these missteps coming from? It's coming from this effort to engage in narrative warfare, which I believe narrative warfare is very important because it's the story that that's how people interpret the news. Is what's the story of the news? What's the story of uh, our life? Like we live a storybook life in our head. Like we all walk around with the story of our life in our head, or most people do. And as they engage with the news, they're really trying to discern what's the story in the news, right? And so it's important to gather information and present it in a narrative form. And it's important to have a narrative game, engage in a narrative warfare, but you have to be so careful with how you do it. And the way the Trump admin has been doing it, I'm mostly speaking about their social media accounts and then people beneath Trump, but Trump has fallen into it too, even though he's so good at it usually. They're making these errors that are going to hurt, that are hurting them ultimately, and they're not winning them anything. If you haven't figured it out, James Comey is going to sue this administration and he's going to win millions of dollars. You can bet on it. You can bet on it. James Comey is going to sue this administration for wrongfully indicting him, and he's going to win. He's going to win all of his expenses and money for his time and money for defamation and whatever else. All right, so back to the point I'm making in this post. And I went over this again. I went over this in my previous podcast. But what the Trump admin needs to do is they need to not play these silly games because they can't win against these black pillars and doomers and people who are engaging with them in bad faith anyway. And some of the figures like Cash, Bongino, Gabbard, Ratcliffe, I think they're great because they engage in this stuff in a very professional way. They state what's going on. They don't get into back and forth. Like Bongino's now out, so he's going back to his media role. So it's different. But when he was deputy director of the FBI, his posts were like, okay, I'm going to fill you guys in on what's going on with the FBI. And I'm not saying they wouldn't ever put out a narrative. They did, but they didn't. They carried a lot more dignity and respect that their office that they held comes with. They did it without lowering themselves or opening up themselves to wrestle with the pig. However, Bondi has had some really bad screw ups with media where they've caught her off guard and she keeps on going on Fox News and it's not doing her any favors because they're drawing her into these exchanges that are unwinnable for her. Susie Wiles, same thing. She had that big profile with like Vanity Fair or whatever, and it just blew up in all of their faces. And of course, these media outlets misrepresent things, but you know they're going to do that. So why step into the pig pen with them? You know, I'd really like to see in this second year of the Trump admin, I'd like to see people in the admin make fewer appearances in the press and on talk shows and just spend less time trying to convince committedly hostile outlets and figures to give the administration the credit it deserves. These critics are not going to change the signal that they put out. So direct your energy toward doing the work and continuing to execute the agenda set by President Trump and letting the results of that be the signal. That's what they need to do. And I've seen, just like right before I hit record, I saw some examples of them still making this error. And I don't think I'm going to get my wish. I don't think I'm going to get my wish. I think they're going to keep on engaging in this way. And I don't think they're going to, I think in the end, it's going to hurt them. Just like in the end, this hurt them. Right? Tisha James case, Comey case, it in the end, it hurt this admin. And there are several examples we can point to where things have just backfired on them, and it's self-inflicted. It's self-inflicted damage. They don't need to. You don't need to, President Trump. You don't need to do this. The admin has so many great successes that they can just ride on. And I wish they would just stick to that. It's fine for them to make an announcement and be like, hey, by the way, we want to correct the media, but they need to go about it in a professional way. And I hear that criticized sometimes when people say like, no, we need to get down and like kind of, we need to be more aggressive, and we shouldn't be afraid. I don't know. It's like some people think that it's like machismo. It's more, it's stronger. It's like, I don't, it's like, it's kind of like an honor culture kind of attitude. And I get that, but that's not really what I'm talking about. It is partly what I'm talking about. What I'm mostly referring to is doing things the right way for the sake of doing them the right way, because there's an old expression. You've probably heard it. The expression is something like, the way you do anything is the way you do everything. If you're sloppy in one area of your life, you're probably sloppy in other areas. If you're clumsy in one way, you're probably clumsy in others. If you're dishonest in one area of your life, you're probably dishonest in others. And when it comes to matters of justice, it matters how you go about it. And this admin has some really incredible stories of massive success when it comes to matters of justice, making the country safer. I could spend another hour going through them. But then it's got some errors. It's got some places where it's messed up. And a lot of those places where those screw ups happen begin with a disregard for how they go about something. And instead, it's just get it done. It's ends justify the means kind of thinking. It's very dangerous. So, all right, I know I retreaded some stuff from the previous video and podcast, but yeah, I wanted to. I wanted to share your thoughts on it in the comments, please. I would really like some feedback. Okay, next subject. There have been some new arrests, and I think that most of this, what I'm about to say, is going to make you very happy. But there's going to be one piece of information that might be a little bit upsetting. Well, actually, this first part might be upsetting because I'm going to make you listen to this asshat and what he has to say, but I have good reason for you to listen to it. All right, so here's this guy.
Yesterday, I went into a church with Nakima Armstrong and I protested these white supremacists. A pastor of the church is a fucking ICE leader in the city.
As you can see, all these pretend Christians, all these comfortable white people who are living lavish, comfortable lives while children are dragged into concentration camps.
So, you know, Pam Bondi, you want to come and arrest me? You want to come and give me charges? So be it.
Oh, well. Done. Today, William Kelly, who was that unhinged man in that video, and part of the team who organized the interruption last Sunday at it's called Cities Church, I believe. You've no doubt seen videos of it. He was arrested, and he's been charged with conspiracy to deprive rights, which is the KKK Act, I believe it's also known as, but it's 18 USC 241. I think he's also facing charges under the FACE Act, which is the act I talked about in the previous podcast episode about that has to do with interrupting people, depriving them from access to healthcare facilities or medical care, and interrupting them in houses of worship, basically. So he was arrested, and in total, 3 individuals have been arrested related to their targeting of a place of worship and violating people's rights to gather freely and exercise their First Amendment right to freedom of expression of religion, freedom to worship, and also the FACE Act. So I think it's 18 USC 241 and 18 USC 288. I could be wrong on the numbers. But these are the 3 individuals who were arrested by the FBI in cooperation with DHS's HSI. Now, there's another person who you might be expecting to see get arrested, and that's Don Lemon. Well, word is from Bill Malugan, who is at Fox News. Word is that he says multiple sources tell me and my colleague David Spunt that the federal magistrate in Minnesota who refused to sign off on an arrest warrant for Don Lemon. Whoa, what? That's right. There was an arrest warrant taken out on Don Lemon, but the magistrate refused to sign it. And the word from Bill Malugan is that that magistrate is Douglas L. Micco, and that Micco's wife works for the Assistant Attorney General, AG Keith Ellison. And Keith Ellison has already been on video approving of Don Lemon's interruption of that church. You can see them together. This is after the storming of the church happened.
And the FACE Act, by the way, is designed to protect the rights of people seeking their reproductive rights to be protected, and so that people, for a religious reason, cannot just use religion to break into women's reproductive health centers.
That's his description of the FACE Act. Let me show you what the FACE Act actually says. The FACE Act, 18 USC 248, freedom of access to clinic entrances, therefore FACE, that's the acronym, prohibits these activities, which are the use of force or threat of force or physical obstruction, intentional injuries, and whoever intimidates or causes these things or interferes with or attempts to injure, intimidate, and interfere with any person because of that person is or has been, or in order to intimidate such a person or anybody of any class or persons who are trying to obtain or provide reproductive health services. Okay, so the first part of this, which would be 18 USC 248 A1, that's what Keith Ellison is talking about. But there's a part 2. There's a part 2. It says, whoever by force or threat of force or by physical obstruction intentionally injures, intimidates, or interferes with, or attempts to injure, intimidate, interfere with any person lawfully exercising or seeking to exercise the First Amendment right of religious freedom at a place of religious worship. What was this? And I'm going to mute it. What was this that we saw?
As you can see, all these.
Sorry, I thought I muted it. Very sorry about that. So what is this but that? That's exactly what this is. This is someone intentionally interfering with and intimidating, harassing people who are gathered together to exercise their First Amendment right of religious freedom. That's exactly what's going on here. That guy, whose name is William Kelly, a.k.a. DeWoke Farmer, that is a textbook violation of the FACE Act. That's as clear as violation of the FACE Act as I can think of. So anyway, Don Lemon Keith Ellison appeared on a podcast immediately following that protest with Don Lemon, who was there at that event. There he is. Now, here's the problem. Here's the part that I don't think you guys are going to like. Which, by the way, the other people arrested, this came after Pam Bondi visited Minneapolis. And of course, people are like, would you just arrest somebody? Blah, 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 blah. Oh, it's just a photo shoot. And you get all the black pillars down here being shitheads. Well, they arrested one of the agitators, Nakima Levy Armstrong. So I think, well, Armstrong is here. And then also this other person, well, that is Armstrong. I thought I had a picture of the other lady. I'll find it in a minute. I'll get her name in a minute. So it looks like they also tried to arrest Don Lemon. Well, they did. But it was denied. And it looks like it's crooked because Miko's wife works for Ellison's office. Seems like a conflict of interest. It just not good. Doesn't sit well with me. Probably doesn't sit well with you guys. But here's something else that I think we have to consider. Just because there's this conflict of interest or apparent conflict of interest or, this really bad look here, there could be a good reason why a magistrate judge, whether his wife works for the AG or not, there could be a very good reason why a magistrate would not sign off on an arrest warrant for Don Lemon. And that reason is contained in this video right here. Don Lemon, whatever you think about him, has been a longtime member of the media, and a judge could look at this and not see, and very easily and reasonably see it as a person doing media, not a person protesting. And so they would have to show the judge, no, here's how he was committing a crime. But that's what they would have to show, is that there was probable cause to arrest him because there's probable cause to believe that there was a crime committed by Lemon as he was there. Maybe he also did journalism, but a judge is going to be very resistant to take out a probable cause arrest warrant on a guy who is a very well-established member of the media and who, it appears right here in this clip, is doing media, not committing a crime. And that's just the way it is. So maybe it'll happen, But the reason I'm really trying to highlight this for you is because there can be more than one explanation for a thing, and it could be that Douglas L. Miko, he's got a conflict of interest, and he doesn't want to upset his wife. He doesn't want to upset her boss, and maybe he knows that Don Lemon had his wife's boss on his podcast just a couple days ago talking about this very thing that there's an arrest warrant in front of him for. And so maybe he was influenced by that. I am 100% willing to believe that, okay? However, there is an alternative explanation for it, and we should all just be cognizant of that and accepting, if that's the reason, that's the reason. And the way that this could be solved, the way that we could eliminate concern that there's something crooked going on here, is for another judge to take a look at it, whose wife doesn't work for Keith Ellison. Right? Okay. So they've been arrested. I think they've all been charged with violations of 18 U.S.C. 241 and conspiracy against rights, and 18 U.S.C. 248, which is the FACE Act. I think they've all been charged with that, but I'm not sure. But these are like the three leaders who of that whole protest. I'm not clear on how many people were actually involved in the protest, but getting the leaders is probably more important than getting getting every single person. Harmeet Dillon, Civil Rights Division head, doing a great job. Really glad to see it. Shout out to AG Pam Bondi. Where'd her post go? She said, okay. Shared that video of him saying, come and arrest me. And she said, okay, I love that. And look, I know I've been complaining about their social media game and them getting into the narrative battle. When it's like this, I'm fine with it. Okay. I'm totally fine with it. That doesn't bother me at all. Her taking a victory, I've been saying, look, at my direction, we've arrested this person. Oh, here's the other person's name. Chantil Louisa Allen. That was the other person arrested. I'm totally fine with it. Here's her taking photos with some people in Minnesota after they had a major victory in a RICO case. And, you know, I'm totally fine with that. I think it's great. I think this is fun right here without actually violating this guy's rights. I don't think any judge is going to look at her writing okay, check mark, and posting this video. I don't think there's anything about that that's unethical or anything at all. However, I do have a worry about something a different admin account did that I think is going to bite them. I think it's going to be ugly for them. Okay. So the official White House verified X account also posted this with the William Kelly guy, and they wrote checkmate. Fine with that. But what's not good is this right here. Here's the original photo that Kristi Noem shared of them arresting this woman who was one of the protesters, and she's been charged with violating 18 USC 241. Okay, that's Nakima Levi Armstrong, or Levi Armstrong. Here's the White House photo where they altered it to make it look like she was crying, super upset, tears rolling down her face. That is not good. I think a judge would not be happy about that. And I think that, look, I'm not going to try to make too big of a deal of it, but this is the kind of thing I've been talking about where they're committing some errors in the narrative war that they don't, it's an unforced error. And what they're trying to do is play a game, and they're sacrificing their respect and dignity of the office and professionality in order to go viral on social media and to get a bunch of laughs. And I get it, man. I get it. But this kind of thing can really backfire. And it doesn't look good. And if you're not with me on that, well, we'll discuss it again down the road and see if it does blow up in their faces. Okay. We'll revisit it later on. All right. So anyway, that's what I got for you on this subject of the Minneapolis church and the protesters being arrested. Good news, mostly good news. But there's a little bit of understanding versus, reacting. A little bit of understanding is greater than reacting. So, yeah. Overall, good stuff though. All right, let's talk about Greenland for a little bit. There's been some Greenland news, and I haven't talked much on my podcast, if at all, on my podcast about Greenland and the situation that's been brewing over it for the past year. So in the first Trump admin, Trump talked about wanting to get Greenland and more U.S. presence there, buy Greenland or annex Greenland. And there was chatter about it, but he didn't make it as big of a push as it has been in the second admin. And starting back in 2025, in spring, he brought the issue up again about wanting Greenland to come to the United States. And one of the things that drove this change was things that were happening with Greenland and China courting a presence there. So Greenland is part of Denmark, but it's also autonomous. And it's been on a path to becoming more and more autonomous and eventually becoming fully independent of Denmark in the future as it's developed and it's gotten more resources, and they're making deals to extract the resources, and the country's becoming more wealthy. And there's not very many people that live there. It's tens of thousands of people who live there, but not millions of people who live there. And the resources that Greenland has are abundant, but they are also extremely challenging to get to. So it needs outside help in order to get at those resources, and it's been making deals to do that. The United States, which is, I'm going to talk about those deals here in a minute. The United States has tried to purchase Greenland in the past, or at least has brought it up. It did so in the 1950s. It brought it up again, and they're all throughout the Cold War. The subject of the United States buying Greenland or being more involved in Greenland has come up over and over again because it's an obvious strategic. It's in an obviously strategic location. One only needs to examine this map to understand why it's so important for the United States to have a presence in Greenland, if not in a very heavy presence there. All of the ICBMs that could hit Washington, D.C., that would be fired from the USSR, now Russia, would end up passing over the top of Greenland or on their way to Washington, D.C., or would come very near to passing over Greenland. And so the Soviet threat is reason enough, just full stop, the Soviet threat, the Russian threat is reason enough for the U.S. to make it an absolute 100% priority to at least have a presence in Greenland, and for that presence to include things like Patriot missile systems, THAAD missile systems, and other things, early warning radars, et cetera, et cetera. And the U.S. did make a deal with Greenland that allows for us to have a base there. We have Thule, which is now Pacific Space Force Base. The U.S. at one point, we had up to like 10,000 U.S. troops in Greenland. It's nowhere near that now. But we do have a base in Greenland, and we would like to have more. But as I said, Greenland's on its way to being more and more independent, and that has led to, it's right here, they're becoming more dependent. They signed off on a new pact that would allow them to become, through a step-by-step process, more independent of Denmark. And as that has been happening, China has become very interested in Greenland and has been making more and more attempts to make mineral deals and other sorts of deals for more presence in Greenland, which of course China and Russia are very much aligned and very much are two primary adversaries on the planet. So it would not be good if this strategic priority for the US would fall under China's umbrella of influence and eventually possession, because as you well know, or should know, China sees no difference between the business deals it does and its military strategy. They're one and the same. And where China has a business presence, they also have a intelligence and military presence and purpose. So for China to get more and more involved in Greenland would eventually play out in a way that would be very bad for the US and for the West, for NATO. China has made so many different attempts, and they haven't fully succeeded in it, but China engaging in this activity has prompted the US to become more serious in Trump's second term about making sure to establish a bigger foothold in Greenland at the expense of China, which China is not happy about. And Russia is kind of happy about it. I'll talk about that in a minute. But it's very easy to understand this situation. Trump said way back in early January, after he had brought this subject up again and said, this is a priority, I'm going to do it. I'm going to buy Greenland. I'm going to take Greenland, whatever it takes. And this set a lot of people off in media and in Europe. But Trump said, I have to do it. If the United States does not occupy Greenland, then Russia or China will. This is very easy to understand, and it's exactly what I pointed out on January 6th. Actually, Trump made that statement on January 9th. 3 days earlier, I said the same thing. Regarding Greenland, Trump is and has been asking big for Greenland, and at the same time making a deal that is equitable to all parties. Now, people are going to disagree on whether or not it's actually going to be equitable. We'll see what kind of deal comes out. But what I mean by that is that it's going to be good for NATO. The parties I'm thinking of right here is NATO. The U.S. doesn't need to invade Greenland. The U.S. needs to secure it as a strategic objective. All that requires is something like an AUKUS security pact, with Denmark and Greenland that allows the U.S. to accomplish these following priorities. 1, expand and build military bases in Greenland. Space Force bases, additional 1 Air Force base, naval bases. We need at least those 3. 2, establish and enhance Arctic presence, meaning more surveillance and development. The Arctic is a critical area of operations and development now, and will only become more critical over the next century plus. If you haven't heard, there's a little less ice on top of Greenland and around Greenland, and that is leading to it being more and more open to navigation for ship traffic, and fishing, and oil, and other resource extraction, mining, all sorts of these things. And Greenland has lots of resources. 3, the third reason for this, denial of operations. And this might actually be like the equally as important as anything else, if not more important. We need to deny China and Russia from having presence there, which is what Trump was referencing here. China and Russia, if the US does not insist on accomplishing the above, China and Russia will, which would be an absolutely unacceptable security threat to both North America and Europe. Now, here's something that's super key that media has not made clear, and neither has Trump. All of NATO understands this. It's just a matter of negotiation. All of NATO understands this map. All of them do. What we've been seeing is a bunch of theater. We've been seeing Trump irritate Europeans. We've been seeing Europeans react, and we saw them. They sent like 400 troops to Greenland and authorized them to defend Greenland against any United States invasion. All of that talk is just BS. All the talk about the U.S. deploying troops to Greenland to forcibly take it, it's just a bunch of bluster. And both sides have been engaging in this theater that is so over the top. And honestly, I think it hurts relations. I don't think it's necessary, 1. 2, I don't think it's a positive thing for NATO to engage in this type of theater and this type of back and forth. Russia loves it because Russia wants there to be disagreement in NATO, because the weaker NATO is, the more opportunities there are for Russia to exploit that and to make more deals with Europe to buy their gas and oil and fund the war in Ukraine. And ultimately, obviously Russia wants NATO to be weak. And the number one way to weaken NATO is for the US and European NATO partners to be more divided. And so the back and forth over Greenland created an opportunity for Russia. And we've seen some of that play out. Greenland's prime minister has also been upset by it. And I think he really knows what's up, but you got to keep in mind, Greenland doesn't want to be bullied about. They're trying to become more and more independent, right? So the whole way this thing has gone down has been very uncomfortable for Greenland, and it just hasn't been good for relations with them, which is what we're trying to do, is promote a good relationship with Greenland so that the U.S. can establish a greater presence there for the security of Greenland itself and for the security of North America, for NATO, all of us. In the lead up to Davos and the forum that's been happening this week, Trump said he would suspend the trade deal the U.S. had been working on with the EU, and that he would put tariffs on the EU if they didn't make an agreement for the U.S. to buy Greenland or to have it or whatever. And that, of course, that blew the Europeans' mind. They just lost their shit over that. Trump also, he already had an ambassador to Greenland, but Trump selected Louisiana Governor Jeff Landry, to be a special envoy to Greenland. I'm not sure what, if anything, he's really had to do with these negotiations that have been playing out. Maybe he already had a good relationship with them. Maybe it's a distraction. I don't know. But just recently, before this latest upset, back in October, Denmark agreed to buy almost $4.5 billion worth of new F-35s. The US and Denmark have a very good relationship. We share a lot of intelligence. We engage in a lot of law enforcement activity together. We engage in a lot of military activity together. So it's been kind of weird. Like, we already had this good relationship with Denmark, and by extension, you would think with Greenland, which is an autonomous, I don't know the word for it, province of theirs. You would think we would just be able to have a normal conversation that would allow for the U.S. to expand presence in Greenland. So I don't really understand the need for all of this circus. And Trump saying things like, look, it's going to be a choice between seizing Greenland or preserving NATO. And this is a very I think what he's trying to say is that, look, either NATO works with us to help us be the powerhouse in NATO we need to be, or we're just going to go ahead and take Greenland. NATO can do whatever it does, but NATO needs the United States. And that's what Trump has like really been pushing. Like his attitude has kind of been like, you idiots in Europe are pretending to not understand what the true dynamics are of this situation, which the true dynamics of it are that map I showed you, are this. And of course, NATO does understand this. They just don't want to publicly acquiesce to Trump. A lot of it has to do with saving face. And to them, saving face, saving status means not giving in to Trump. So anything they can do, even if it puts the NATO alliance at risk, they'll do. And Trump being pissed off about this, that's probably contributed to how he's gone about this entire Greenland thing. In other words, it's a lot of petty and emotional junk between leaders of different states in NATO.
So we want a piece of ice for world protection, and they won't give it. We've never asked for anything else, and we could have kept that piece of land, and we didn't. So they have a choice. You can say yes, and we will be very appreciative, or you can say no, and we will remember.
And he's been threatening with them and tough with them. And in some ways, that's how he needs to be. This really set him off that we've never asked for anything ever. That's resulted in a bunch of memes about how many NATO troops have been lost in the war on terror and all these things. That's not really what he's talking about, but probably not the best line to deliver. Making the same point over and over again. Rubio came in a bit more diplomatically and said, the United States cares greatly about the people of Europe and the bonds we share as a civilization, that we want strong allies, not seriously weakened ones, which Europe has been seriously weakened by their relationship with Russia, China, and corruption, and just the expectation that the Americans are going to secure the world while they get to bitch about us. Rubio says Rubio didn't say everything I just said. Europe must depart from the culture they've created over the last 10 years. Otherwise, they will destroy themselves. And what he means is non-cooperation with Trump, while also expecting Trump to fund the defense of NATO and Europe by contributing to the war in Ukraine on Ukraine's side, which is the right thing for us to do. But Europe, their attitude about it is incorrect. And the whole reason Ukraine's in the situation that it's in is largely because of Europe, not because of the US. Trump. So anyway, Trump goes to Davos, and on Tuesday, things start to turn around. He's still like going over to Davos. He's still posting memes like this, and you have various people that are pro-Trump and MAGA people who are advocating and like, yeah, we're just going to take over Greenland, 51st state, all of these things. But, and I get it, but like really a key point he said that I haven't seen get as much traction as it should is that NATO is only as good as America is. And if NATO doesn't work with America so that we can secure what we need to secure, which is ourselves and other members of the NATO alliance, then the alliance is going to fall. And it's going to be vulnerable to attack from China and Russia, exploitation from both of those countries. So finally, remember what I said about what was going on. I said, we're working on a deal. Everyone understands this is about making a deal, some sort of pact, some sort of security pact where the U.S. has a greater presence in Greenland. That's what I've been saying, right? And finally, that appears to be happening.
We have a concept of a deal. I think it's going to be a very good deal for the United States, also for them. And we're going to work together on something having to do with the Arctic as a whole, but also Greenland. And it has to do with the security, great security, strong security, and other things.
The market, 600 points, getting back a lot of some of the nervousness we had in the last couple of days. The tariffs are off. Nothing happens on February 1st.
No, we took that off because it looks like we have pretty much a concept of a deal.
A deal of ownership.
So, I mean, he had his threat with tariffs, suspending the trade deal, all those things. It worked. You know, maybe we'll find out down the road that it really was necessary for Trump to be extremely forceful on this issue. I'm not convinced of that because our relationship with Denmark was so good anyway. But maybe it was necessary because in the works were some of those deals with China, and that was looking lucrative to them. I don't know, but you know, there's so much statecraft that happens in a way that is unseen and very difficult to perceive, and you know, that goes into these things. But this huge Greenland crisis that has been going on for a while seems to be resolving in exactly the way that I thought it would and that many others believed it would, which is a new deal with Greenland.
A deal.
Well, it's a little bit complex, but we'll explain it down the line. But the Secretary General of NATO and I and some other people were talking, and it's the kind of a deal that I wanted to be able to make.
Where does Denmark, did they weigh in on what they want, what they would agree to?
Well, I assume they did because he very much represents, he's a strong leader. Mark, you know Mark.
Yeah.
Yeah, NATO leader Mark Rutte has actually been more on board with this, and I've seen like a few other. I don't remember who was a NATO advisor. It might have been a military advisor in the UK who was kind of giggling about the theater and being like, all the media is like thinking the United States is going to deploy Delta Force to go take over Greenland, and it's so silly. And he was just laughing about how silly and how the media are just being wrapped up in this cartoonish portrayal of relationships and of the subject matter of the U.S. and Greenland, when really it's very clear to the NATO partners and the people who actually are going to have to make this happen that it's about security and always has been about security. So Trump, as I said it would be, Trump made this post and said, based upon a very productive meeting that I have had with Secretary General of NATO, Mark Rutte, we have formed the framework of a future deal with respect to Greenland and, in fact, the entire Arctic region. This solution, if consummated, will be a great one for the United States of America and all NATO nations. Based upon this understanding, I will not be imposing the tariffs that have been scheduled to take place on February 1st. Additional discussions are being held concerning the Golden Dome, which is the massive missile defense system. It's like the Iron Dome in Israel, only better because it's golden, of course. And then, he praised everybody involved with it. Thank you for following along with this cartoonish episode. New York Times has some information about the negotiations, which are still ongoing, but the elements they described, or that were described by 8 senior Western security and diplomatic officials. And I'm thinking they probably are purposefully leaking these details out. They were authorized to do this, maybe not, but when there's that many people doing it, there's probably this is probably a message that the administration is wanting to get out. So it offers the fullest picture yet of the contours of a potential compromise. Critically, the proposals under discussion would stop short of Mr. Trump's goal of transferring ownership of Greenland to the United States. All these people spoke in condition of anonymity. So U.S. is not going to take over Greenland. It is unclear if these discussions will ultimately yield agreement over the territory. Denmark, which publicly opposes ceding ownership of Greenland, may not agree to the plans on the table. Still, the officials said they were hopeful they could simultaneously address Trump's concerns about securing the Arctic against possible threats from Russia and China. The proposal would, 1, create a significant new NATO mission in the Arctic. Multiple officials have dubbed this mission Arctic Sentry, in a nod to the similarly named NATO mission in the Baltic Sea and Eastern Europe that are meant to counter an increasingly aggressive Russia. 2, it would update the pact that was signed in 1951 between the United States and Denmark. That pact gives the U.S. military-wide access to Greenland, an autonomous Danish territory, for operations, including the construction and operation of military bases. We already have that agreement in place. We just need to expand it. American officials have said they are concerned that this access could be curbed or ended if Greenland were to obtain independence. Remember what I was talking about earlier? How Greenland has been taking steps towards independence, and at the same time they are doing that, China has been eyeing them, has been courting them, because they want it. They want the resources. They want the strategic objective. Russia wants it too. And if Russia can't afford to do it, then they'll have their ally of convenience anyway, China, do it. NATO officials have discussed expanding the 1951 pact. Next, such an agreement would likely be modeled on a sovereign base area agreement in Cyprus, where Britain's military bases are regarded as British territory. That would give the United States greater control over the land than it currently exerts over U.S. embassies. And it would also allow for the buildup of the so-called Golden Dome missile defense system. It would restrict non-NATO member countries, particularly Russia and China, from obtaining rights to mine rare earth minerals that lie deep under Iceland's ice sheet. Now, a lot of people are going to criticize and say, well, this is all about the U.S. The same people who said that the U.S. got involved in Venezuela because of oil, because we're greedy and we're trying to steal Venezuela's oil. They're going to make the same argument that the U.S. is trying to steal the resources from Greenland. No, we're trying to steal Greenland's resources from Russia and China. That's what's up. I swear, people need to. And by the way, the next battle of this type is going to be Diego Garcia, which is also called the Chaga Islands. In the south of Iran, where we have the Diego Garcia base, which we operate B-2s out of and B-1s, and it's a super important base out in the Indian Ocean right there. That's the next place that we're going to have a battle over, a diplomatic battle, because the UK is talking about surrendering it to the local island chain. And the US is not going to give up that base. So anyway, what I was going to wrap this up by saying that a lot of people, well, actually, let me say it this way. I think that, if I could design a curriculum for public schools and private schools, I would have students play the video game Civilization. Probably Civilization 3 or 5, if I remember right. I think 3 and 5 were my favorite editions of the game. But I would have students play that starting in like 6th grade, so that they would understand not just the map of the world, but so that they would understand it doesn't have to be a globe-based map, but just so they would understand strategic, how territory, how geography factors into strategy and national security. And they would understand how if you don't immediately go out and seize the resources on the map that are closest to you, that are neighboring you, if you don't establish a presence on top of resources on the map, your enemies will. That's the nature of power. That's the nature of the whole game of civilization, both the actual video game, but then also the game of civilization in real life. And I just think that so many people, they just don't think about things this way. But us gamers do. We understand what denial of operations, denial of presence, what those things are. And it happens in the game of Risk. Risk would be the board game would be another great game that students should play. I think anybody who's played the Civilizations video game series or played the Risk, the board game, probably immediately understands what's going on with Greenland. So looks like the deal is in the works. And, if you bought into the narrative that the U.S. was going to forcefully take over Greenland, deploy our military there and get in a shootout with NATO partners, man, don't fall for that stuff. But also, if you thought that Trump wasn't going to succeed in one of his key strategic objectives, or if he was not going to succeed in getting what he wanted, as far as the Golden Dome goes, and as far as countering China and Russia, oh man, you got to catch up. Trump wins a lot, and nobody in NATO is going to say it. NATO's not going to say it. U.S. media is not going to say it. But Trump put out an ultimatum. He did as I said. He asked big, and he kept on asking big. And then he put down his foot down and gave an ultimatum. Threatened Europe with tariffs and a suspended trade deal. Pissed a bunch of people off. And now his team is currently negotiating a new deal for exactly what Trump wanted all along, something he's wanted since his first term, and he's going to get it. Good times. Okay, I think I'm going to wrap this episode up there. I do want to remind everybody that the best way to support the show is justhuman.substack.com, a paid subscription over there. And starting with the next issue of the Just Cases newsletter, which is going to be issue 7, that newsletter is going to be for my paid subscribers. If you're considering becoming a paid subscriber over at justhuman.substack.com, you get everything on here as a free subscriber, but the Just Cases newsletter, which is a newsletter that I go over all of the different cases I follow, and I provide updates on what's going on with them. I tell you about what the case is, who the defendants are, why the case matters, and what the latest news on the case is. If you're interested in that, take a look at issue number 6, which is free. And that'll give you an idea of what this newsletter provides to you. It's a couple thousand words delivered to you every 2 or 3 weeks, depending on how much news is actually happening with these cases. But if you're interested in a concise breakdown of these cases, this is the place to go. And I put out issue 6 free so that people would have an idea of what type of information the newsletter would provide going forward once it's paywalled. And I'm making it paywalled because I want people who support me on Substack. I want to acknowledge them as being the core of my support, and to thank them and provide something to them that is unique, some access that is unique. And I thought this would be a really good way to do it. I don't want to make my podcast paywalled or any of my videos. I don't really like that idea. and I'm not too fond of making my articles paywalled. But at the same time, I feel compelled to thank my Substack supporters with something that is uniquely there for paid supporters. So that's what it is. If you're interested in supporting the show in a bigger way, subscription at justhuman.substack.com is the best way. Otherwise, my other support links are in my link tree. You can buy something for yourself from Benson Honey Farms bootleg products, or buy something for someone else at Manly Cans. And if you use my affiliate links, a couple dollars get kicked my way. If you just feel so inclined to, just buy me 1 cup of coffee, you can go to ko-fi.com and buy me 1 or more. And I really appreciate all the support that I get from you guys. Y'all are ultimately what makes this possible for me to engage in with the mic and interact with y'all. I had last episode was kind of within myself, or I ended up within myself. And I hope people will listen to episode 363 all the way through and get to that end point where I have that epiphany. I have that moment of clarity. Because it was really good for me, and I know that for some people they've sent me some notes saying that they really appreciated that, and they had similar feelings. So, but to anybody who, well, let me say it this way. So there are times when I record an episode or a short video or segment, and after doing so, I'll sometimes get a bunch of anxiety about it. And I was very reluctant to release that episode. I was very reluctant to release. I just because I had expressed a vulnerability in a way. And I've come to learn that when I have these moments of intense anxiety after making a recording or writing something, that means that either I really do need to rewrite it or re-record it, or I've just done something that is so sincere and so, just candid. I've revealed some part of myself that normally would remain hidden. That's why I'm having anxiety, and it's also why people would relate to it and why I should release it. There's like this dichotomy, that this paradox that comes over me, and I'm faced with, do I publish it or do I not? Do I whatever? And when I sat down with that previous episode and I was doing a little bit of editing to it, and as I was doing the editing to it, I was really considering chopping off a big part of it or re-recording or something. And then as I went through it and added in the edits, you have to re-listen as you do that. And as I did, I was just like, no, I have to release this. I have to release this. Even if it's not appreciated by everybody in my audience, there's going to be people who do appreciate it. There's going to be people who do get something out of it. I know there's people in my audience who have been feeling a similar way. And we all get caught up in the urge to counteract the black pillars and doomers. And I always have. But we always have to be careful not to sink down to their level. We got to stop ourselves from wrestling with the pig. And it can be so hard to do. And in the social media game, it can be so easy to get in that pig pen and not realize that you're in it until you're already dirty. Right? And everything about being in social media and in the news and current events stuff, it compels you, it draws you in to engage at the low level that it exists at. You know, how often do you go on social media or listen to a podcast or watch a video or something, read the news, watch a news program? How often do you do that and afterward feel elevated in your humanity, in your knowledge? How often do you actually like engage in those things and walk away or set it down, or the program concludes and you feel like you have improved yourself? Pretty damn rare, isn't it? Pretty rare. And so we should look for sources that do that for us and avoid those that don't. Right? And that's what I have to do more of. Because it's like, that's the danger to me. Like here I am, I'm going to be a little bit vulnerable again, but whatever. Most of you guys have been listening to me a long time. You know me. So then none of this is going to surprise you, but I am of a personality type and psychology that I have to keep in mind that I'm uniquely susceptible to being lured into that stuff. And it has a greater effect on me than it does others. And one of the things about me is that I have a very elevated threat detection system. Like we all have these threat detection systems in our brain that we've evolved to have, and it's everything from recognizing the dangers of a snake or some other sort of predator, and various things. I'm not going to get into a deep discussion of it, but we all have this threat detection system. And I'm the type of person that through my life experience and just nature and nurture, I have an elevated threat detection system. And that comes in very useful to me at times. It has really been useful to me throughout my life, but it has also been a detriment to me. And one of the things that trying to counter negativity does is it activates one of the things that's factoring into my efforts to do it is the activation of my threat detection system, my internal one. And too much of that is unhealthy for me. And because it's internal, it's difficult for me to be aware of it in the moment. The other thing is that just because of my life experiences and my nature and my nurture, both of those things, I'm more affected by the toxicity that's online and in the news. And I have to be very careful about too much exposure to that. And what is good for me is to do what I've done with this program, with this podcast since the very beginning, which is just be all about the knowledge and just be all about finding the good news and the positives and sticking to those things and sticking to my values and my principles and brushing aside the negative. And in that way, I can be the signal. I can be the light. That's what's healthy for me. And it's also a defense for me against all those other things. And I think there's a good number of people in my audience who are similar to me in several of the respects that I just mentioned. But there are others who are not. They have different personalities and different experiences, different nurture and different nature. And it doesn't affect them as greatly as it does me. I don't know. You guys are weird. So maybe, these past 2 episodes, you haven't really been like, what is Kyle going on about? Why is he so upset about these things? And that's okay too. That's okay too. All right. I appreciate you guys. Thank you for your support. Thank you for listening to me babble behind the mic. I hope you have a wonderful weekend. We're getting snowed in here in Virginia. Actually, probably more like iced in where I'm at. It's probably going to be more ice than snow. I hope it's a lot of snow. I would really like to see my kids play in the snow. My 6-year-old, pretty soon he'll be old enough. He'll be so, he'll get into that age where it's not going to be as magical. So I would really like for us to get a heavy dose of good snow to play in this weekend, but the forecast is looking more icy, snow and then ice on top of it. So that's not good. But it's also the 24 hours of Daytona this weekend. So being snowed in with the family, making meals for them and snacks and watching racing, that sounds like my kind of weekend. And then I'm going to mix in a little bit of newsletter writing for the Just Cases newsletter, and looking pretty good. So God bless you all. Stay positive. Stay human. I'll see you in the next one.